Welcome into another episode of Home Field Advantage. My name is Will Highland. Hope you're having a great week or weekend, wherever and however you may be listening to this across our great country or our great land. And if you're joining us on YouTube Live at the Sportland USA channel, thanks for tuning in there. It's October 2nd, 2022. We have a loaded show, as always, to bring to you leading up to the 1 o'clock NFL kickoff. Um, I don't really know what's going on with my streaming software here. Hopefully, things work out okay. Usually, the video is frontwards, it's backwards. But I guess we'll just make do of it what we can. First place I want to start today is with the college football slate that we had yesterday. I'm going to talk about Tua. I'm going to talk about Mac Jones. I'm going to talk NFL. I'm even going to talk a little bit of MLB as we close out. But I do want to start with yesterday's college football slate because just like last week, it was extraordinary. There were plays to be made that weren't. There were upsets that occurred. There were certain matchups that will undoubtedly alter who makes the playoff or who makes the New Year's Six at the end of the year. So there was a lot going on in the landscape of college football yesterday. Now, just like last week, I'm going to provide 3 winners and 3 losers. So I think if you're Alabama and you get that big win on the road in Arkansas, you have to be the number one winner of the weekend. And in my opinion, you have to be the number one overall team in the country after what happened to Georgia. And we'll get to that in a second. But for Alabama, you looked at the way they went and they played in Austin a few weeks ago. It was tough. It was a 1-point game. That Texas team looks worse and worse as the weeks go on, even though they got a win over West Virginia yesterday. They don't look great. And so for Alabama, they really needed a road win. That was a signature road win. And we've seen them in recent years under Bryce Young actually struggle a little bit on the road. So for Alabama to go to Arkansas yesterday, get that big win in conference, to me, they're the number one winner of the weekend. Number 2 winner of the weekend is Kansas. Now, Kansas has actually become, I believe they're 5-0 now. They've become a factor in college football. Usually when you talk about the Kansas Jayhawks, this is a March Madness conversation. But this year, they've come out and they've proven through 5 games that in that Big 12, they could make a run at a conference title, especially with the way Oklahoma's been playing and how bad they've looked. Oklahoma State, I think you still have to look at as a potential winner of that conference. Same thing with TCU now. But with Kansas, after a team goes 5-0 and what Leopold's doing there, that team is a force in the Big 12. The Big 12 might be the second best conference in the country after the SEC, in my opinion, after this weekend. And Kansas has a lot to do with that. And they'll host TCU next week. Game day will go to Kansas for that game. And TCU and Kansas will meet as unbeatens. And that game could go a long way in determining who becomes the Big 12 champion. So I am bullish right now on the Kansas Jayhawks. I definitely believe they deserve to be ranked. I haven't looked at the rankings since they came out this morning. But next week's game, when they host the Horned Frogs, will go a long way to determine who will be the top team in the Big 12. And at this point, I think you have to look at Kansas as the number 2 winner of the weekend. All right, heading out west here, number 3 winner of the weekend, it's UCLA. UCLA is not a ranked team. They came in, they were playing number 15 Washington. They were hosting the Huskies. And for the Bruins to get that win over Washington is huge. UCLA, I don't think they're going to be a factor in the Pac-12 in terms of who's going to win the conference. I still think at this point you could probably look at Oregon or Utah potentially as the favorites to win that conference. Obviously, UCLA came in unranked, but with what they did against Washington at home, the Pac-12's chances of being a playoff team took a hit because I think Washington was their best chance. Although now you could still look at Oregon as saying, all right, well, Oregon, their only loss so far is to Georgia. Georgia's, we're going to get to them in a second, not necessarily as high as someone might have thought, but it's still Georgia, the defending national champs. So now it's like Oregon, Utah, they lost to Florida. Florida's not ranked. Washington lost to UCLA. UCLA is not ranked. But I think UCLA, just by winning, they've sort of thrown more ambiguity into the potential playoff decisions that will be made. Not that they're going to be one, but that they're just playing spoiler. And I think for that program, in terms of recruiting, in terms of the way, oh, of course, USC, they're a factor in the Pac-12 as well. But when it comes to recruiting, if you can show that you're on the upward trajectory, then perhaps just maybe UCLA could somehow become prominent again in football in a crowded Pac-12 and in a Pac-12 that will soon look different once those two LA schools head to the Big Ten. But you look at that Pac-12 now. It's USC, it's Oregon, it's Utah. Unfortunately, I don't think Washington's in the picture anymore because UCLA took care of business at home. All right, losers of the weekend, Kentucky. Now, I know going to Ole Miss wasn't necessarily the easiest game for the Wildcats, but with the way Lane Kiffin came out and challenged his fan base, you knew that place down in Oxford was going to be going. And Kentucky, if they wanted to still be considered a top 10 team in the country, they had to go on the road and get a win like that and continue to stay ahead of Tennessee, because now you've got Tennessee looming on the road in a couple weeks, and Kentucky, it's starting to look dire a little bit there in terms of competing with the Tennessees and the Georgia in the SEC East. So because of that loss, I put the Wildcats as my first loser of the weekend. My second loser of the weekend is the Georgia Bulldogs staying in the SEC East. It sounds a little weird talking about the Georgia Bulldogs as a loser, considering that they A, won the game, and B, are still undefeated, and C, are actually still the reigning national champions. I haven't looked at the rankings. I'm going to pull those up real quick. But in my opinion, Georgia should no longer be the number one overall team in the country. I think they are still. But in my opinion, I look at Alabama as being the better team at this point. Just the way Georgia's looked the last 2 weeks against Missouri and against Kent State, those are teams that Georgia should just roll over. And they barely got out of Missouri with a win. Look, Georgia's still Georgia. Stetson Bennett, Brock Bowers, one of the best tight end quarterback duos in the country. I would say the best. They're still a phenomenal football team. Kirby's an awesome coach. But you go on the road against a really bad Missouri team and have struggled right after struggling against Kent State, raise a little bit of eyebrows in my opinion. Whereas Alabama, they went on the road and they won big at Arkansas, which was a ranked team. So to me, I think Alabama's better than Georgia at this point. I know that sounds crazy. The eyeball test, I know, would show you that Georgia's probably a better football team, push comes to shove. If they played each other 10 times, I think Georgia probably wins 6 or 7 of them. But to me, if you're just going to go on what the resume is in front of you, I think Alabama is the best team in the country. My third loser of the week, again, is Oklahoma. Now, I don't know how Oklahoma can still be ranked 18th with a 3-2 record. That's ridiculous to me. Uh, they host Texas next week. That's going to be interesting. The Red River Shootout. I am not high on the Sooners. Last week they lose that game to Kansas State. This week they lose to TCU on the road in Fort Worth, but still, nevertheless, a loss by 31 points. So if I'm a Oklahoma Sooner fan, I guess I'm still happy that we're ranked in the top 25, but we're 3-2 and we've lost two in a row. Like that's just, to me, it just not a recipe for a team that deserves to be ranked. Now this could be last week's rankings. I'm not sure. Um, I see Kansas State in there at 4-1, Pitt in there at 3-2 in the top 25, 24 spots. So these could be old rankings. I don't know if it's updated. Um, I don't know where and when we'll get those from the AP. Usually they're out by Sunday. So it's a little confusing why they're not out at this point on Sunday. So I could be wrong. Those could be old rankings, but nevertheless, whether the Sooners are 18th or whether they're out of the rankings altogether, I don't think it's disputable that they were another huge loser this weekend. They continually um, just were failed to score against TCU yesterday. TCU did whatever they wanted to do offensively. And look, I think the Horned Frogs are a good team, but this isn't the TCU team that we saw, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So to me, I'm a little bit bearish on TCU in relation to previous years. But even with that, Oklahoma going on the road and losing by 31 points, they deserve to find a spot in my loser list on the weekend. All right, now another game that didn't find a way into either my winners or losers list. Again, my winners being Alabama, Kansas, and UCLA, and my losers being Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Georgia. Another game that didn't make it in either way was NC State and Clemson, which I thought was a really entertaining game. I watched a lot of that game in the second half. It seemed like NC State wasn't able to execute offensively because that Clemson defense is legit, right? I mean, oh, their defensive front just did whatever it wanted to do against NC State's offensive line, and because of that, Devin Leary was under duress all evening. But what I saw out of NC State, though, was a team that plays really well on the road. That's a tough environment. Going to Clemson, Death Valley, Memorial Stadium, almost just a stadium packed shoulder to shoulder on a Saturday night, loud. They do that big entrance there and everything. We know what kind of team Clemson is. They deserve to be a top 5 team. After wins over Wake Forest and NC State back to back, they did what Oklahoma couldn't do, which is win back-to-back games against tough opponents. But for Clemson, I don't take anything away from NC State for losing to Clemson on the road. I mean, if they were going to lose to Clemson, it's better that they did so on the road. I don't know the playoff structure and how that looks, or the championship structure, excuse me, in the ACC and how that looks in terms of who is going to end up playing who in the conference championship. But my guess is there's not a scenario where the loser of that game makes the ACC championship. And so it's a big blow for NC State in that regard. I still think they deserve to be a top 15 team. In my opinion, if you were going to put a one-loss team, and I'll look at the rankings right here again, or at least last week's rankings with this week's standings or win-loss records. But if you were going to put any one-loss team in the top 15, I think it's got to be NC State. Washington's 4-1. They lost to UCLA. Kentucky's 4-1. I know losing to Ole Miss isn't bad, So maybe you can make an argument for them. Minnesota, Wake, Wake lost to Clemson as well. Florida State lost to Wake, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So there's arguments to be made. Obviously, BYU's 4-1 as well, but to me, NC State, what they showed last night, offensively, it was going to be a rock fight, but defensively, they held Clemson to 23 points, or it was 30 points. They held Clemson to 30 points at home. Now, then you might say like that's not a huge margin, but last week Clemson scored, what was it, 6 or 7 touchdowns against Wake Forest. Clemson's been scoring points all year long, and even though this isn't the same offense that we saw, under Deshaun or under Trevor Lawrence, Dabo still knows how to dial stuff up, right? And so for me, I look at that, and Clemson to only lose by 10 or 7 on the road, I can't remember the final score, is good for NC State. And so for that reason, I still think they deserve to be a top 15 team, even though they lost yesterday. All right, I'm going to head over to the NFL now. There's clearly been a story that's made waves over the last few days, and that is the situation going on with Tua Tagovailoa. Now, most of the time, sports commentators, people that get paid a lot more than what I do, which is nothing for this show, people have been on TV all over the dial for the last 3 days, bloviating about what they believe to be fact, what they believe happened. And the fact of the matter is, there's just so much we still don't know about the situation. The only fact is that we don't know the facts. We may think we know the facts because of what so and so reported, or what we saw. And I would say probably the only thing that we can deduce from this situation is what the fans, the viewers, and people involved saw with their own 2 eyes. Not what they heard, not what they read, but what they saw. And what I saw last Sunday was Tua Tagovailoa concussed. Now, I'm not a neurosurgeon, not a doctor. I don't think you have to be to understand that what he had on Sunday was a concussion, or at least, at the very minimum, a head injury, or a neck injury. Again, not a physician, but I don't think you have to be to understand that he was, hit 6 ways to Sunday. And then for him to play 4 days later and get hit again, you don't have to be James Bond or Nancy Drew to figure out that mystery. He is, in fact, suffering from a second injury, probably linked to the first one. So I know I said we don't know the facts, and then I went on to use words like probably and likely. But to me, that's the extent of what we know. So that's the only thing that I can talk about. We also know that a independent, unnamed, unaffiliated spotter, surgeon, doctor, whomever, trainer was fired by the NFLPA. All right. And this reeks of a little bit of a cover up, but I don't think with the amount of attention that this has received over the last few days that you're going to be able to cover anything up. Because if there's one thing, the NFL's boogeyman, all right, if you've ever seen the Will Smith movie Concussion, that's what they called it. Head injury problems and the reaction that they get are the NFL's boogeyman. They are the one thing that will energize people that don't care about the sport more, is when they see the human element of it, and the fact that people who are hurt, clearly hurt, aren't getting the protection they need from their employer. that energizes people that would otherwise not give a you know what about the NFL or about college football. And those people sometimes reside in high places, like the US government or the medical industry or the news media. And these people often have large followings and large audiences to make the NFL tremble in its boots because we know if there's one thing that this league cares about more than anything, it's the perception that they have. And so for this situation, the league is going to have to be um, really careful that they don't get into legal trouble and that they somehow find a way to make it right in the court of public opinion. Now they've come out with new protocols and this and that. Um, but honestly, it's only going to continue to happen because we know that no matter how many times they say things like player safety is of the utmost importance to us, what they really mean is getting the players back on the field because they're safe so that we can continue to showcase the best product is what is most important to us. That's what that means. Um, and there's been a lot of people that have said things along the lines of, well, Tua should have gotten Tua should have not gotten back in the game. He should have advocated for himself. And there's certainly an ounce of truth to that. But at the same time, when somebody is undergoing head trauma, um, perhaps their judgment and decision making and thinking shouldn't be the final say. This is why we have protocol. Um, and you could take an everyday example like coronavirus, right? Like, let's say you have coronavirus, so you've got COVID-19, and your boss knows you've tested positive for it, you know you've tested positive for it, and you say, I don't care what the rules are, I'm going to go to work anyway. Your boss would look at you and say, no, you're not, or else you're going to get fired, like, no, you're not. Um, Same thing. Like if Tua comes and says, look, guys, like I know I've got this head injury, I'm going to play. The doctor should have been like, no. So everyone's blaming everybody else. Are we going to blame the Miami team doctors? Probably not, because the NFL takes over some of these situations. But then again, Mike McDaniel has the final say of who gets to start a game. And if he was concerned about Tua Tagovailoa, he could have started Teddy Bridgewater. And people would have understood, and could have said, look, you're my franchise quarterback. I make the decisions for personnel on this football team, and I'm making the decision that's best for the football team because I don't want you to get hurt and you're our franchise quarterback. And you getting hurt in the second quarter doesn't help us beat the Cincinnati Bengals. Then the people that are blaming Tua, as I've said, if he has a head injury, maybe his judgment and his thinking about, oh, I'm good enough to play. They're always going to say that they're good enough to play. But it's the employer, it's the people in charge, it's the union, it's the league, it's the team doctors and the coach whose job it is to look out for the player and protect him from himself as much as protect him from further injury. And so that's the hole in blaming Tua. There's holes in blaming Mike McDaniel. There's holes in blaming the Dolphins team staff. It's kind of a cop out to say it was a collective failure, but I believe it was. I also believe that, and I'm not wearing a tin pot hat here on the side of a road, sitting in a tent with a doomsday sign, but wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't put it past the NFL at this point for them to look at Thursday night's game between the top two picks in the 2020 draft, after some previous primetime games that has been a little bit of a dud, and say, these two young, fast offenses with great receivers and likable quarterbacks in cool uniforms, we want the best game. Because of that, we want Tua Tagovailoa on the field. So I also wouldn't put it past them either. All right. I don't know what's going on with my stream here, but I think we're good. I think I'm still keeping my video feed. If you're listening on audio, I hope you aren't too annoyed with me wanting to make sure that my uh, video feed is going well. Sometimes with YouTube, I just find that the quality comes and goes. I do like Facebook Live slightly better, but I think YouTube does give you more tools, and so that's why I'm using YouTube today. But I guess that's beside the point. All right, moving on here to another NFL topic, and then we're going to close out talking baseball. But there's a game this afternoon. If you're listening after probably 7:30 on Sunday evening of the second, you know the result of the Patriots and Packers game. Um, but I did just want to, while we're talking about quarterback injuries, want to touch briefly on what's going on with Mac Jones and the Patriots. I've talked about this on Monday. I said the biggest problem for the Patriots was not Mac Jones being an above average quarterback at best and a bad quarterback at worst this year, but it was actually that he was hurt. Because even if Mac Jones has an average game like we saw against the Steelers on the road, in some cases that's still good enough to compete in this league. What's not good enough to compete is when Brian Hoyer is back there taking sacks to close out the half as he did 2 years ago in Kansas City, almost 2 years ago to the date, by the way, or as much as Bailey Zapp, who's not played a single down of NFL football before, um, or Zappy or whatever his name is. Now, I think Bailey Zappi is probably still a better option than Brian Hoyer because he has a bigger ceiling. But I also think he has a lower floor. I think this game this afternoon between the Pats and the Packers will probably be over by the end of the third quarter. But if you're the Patriots, you go in there, you run a JV offense, you try and run the ball, make the Packers stop the run. Make them. If they can't stop the run, Brian Hoyer, he shouldn't throw more than 10 balls. And if he should, they should be play action or checkdowns. Same thing with Zappy if he gets in there. Make the Packers stop the run. And if they do stop the run, all right, I guess you have to just keep the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands. Because if they can do that, I give the Pats a puncher's chance in the second half if the game's still close. But if the game's over by the third quarter because you turn the ball over or you can't score points before the half, I would almost say if you're the Patriots, you want to receive at kickoff because what you can't afford to do is defer, give the ball to Aaron Rodgers, have them walk down the field and wax you and score a touchdown, and then for you to go out and do a 3 and out. If you go 3 and out in your opening possession, guess what? It is what it is. You were going to end up losing some possessions anyway when you play the Packers. The Packers get the ball and start the second half, whatever. But if the risk reward benefit is if the Pats take the ball and milk the clock for 8 minutes and go down and kick a field goal, that's 8. Aaron Rodgers hasn't touched the ball and there's only 6 minutes left in the first quarter. You know what I mean? So I think for this situation, if I'm the Patriots and I win the toss, I take the ball, I run the ball, and I force Green Bay to stop the run. And if you get into a favorable formation, I go hurry up. I do some screen game. I do a little bit of screen game. I do a few play action passes, but most of it, I just hand the rock, flip flop between Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris, make them stop it. And if they can't stop it, oh well. I don't know who the inactives are. I'm sure we'll know within a few minutes. But again, if I'm the Patriots, I might, we don't have Jacoby Myers today either. I might only dress Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar. I don't know who the other receivers are on this team. I know Thornton's hurt. Myers is hurt. I can't think of any other receiver on this team. Um, Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, you probably want to start because of blocking in the run game, but I wouldn't start more than two receivers. I wouldn't dress more than two receivers because honestly, I would much rather they have three fresh running backs. Pierre Strong, let's see what he's got. I think Ty Montgomery's hurt. I would probably bench a little Jordan Humphrey. That's who I'm thinking of. I would probably bench him and just start Aguilar and Bourne and see what happens. I wouldn't go too crazy with any of these offensive strategy. I would just play a JV offense and hope that you can keep the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands as much as possible. And let's not also pretend that they were some prolific offense last week against the Buccaneers. Now, we obviously don't have the manpower on defense that Tampa Bay has, but they're definitely holes in that offense in that they haven't played a lot of time together. They haven't spent a lot of time together. So if I'm the Patriots defense, I punch them in the mouth early. I play old school, hard nosed football. Um, and I do something to the tune of what happened in the 2016 season when the Houston Texans came to town on Thursday night and you had Jacoby Brissett and you basically dumbed down the offense and made Houston stop the run and they couldn't. So I would do the same thing today. Take the crowd out of it early. Do not let the crowd get jazzed up with a first possession touchdown. Just try and take the crowd out of it early if you can, if that's even possible up there. All right, speaking of crowds, what I've seen the past couple days, just watching baseball in the periphery, is that the Toronto Blue Jays, the Seattle Mariners, the Atlanta Braves, some of these franchises are just horny for baseball right now. They are on their way to October. We're obviously in October, but everybody in baseball knows that that means the postseason. And the Braves are looking to defend their crown. The Blue Jays and the Mariners are resurrecting the American League circa 1994 prior to the strike. And to me, I am super excited about I'm going to sneeze here. Sorry about that. Super excited about the prospect of some of these franchises that are involved in the Major League Baseball postseason, like the St. Louis Cardinals and the Adam Wainwright, Yadier Molina, Albert Pujols grouping, mixed with Nolan Arenado and some of their other young players. I love that. I love the Braves getting back there. Austin Riley is a witch of the highest order, in the words of Jake Crane. I think that the Mariners and what they're doing out there and the jazzed up fan base that they've got in the Emerald City is something that we have not seen that from that club in a very long time. And then obviously um, the Yankees and what's going on with Judge, you have to respect them in the AL East, of course. And then last but not least, the Toronto Blue Jays, they are loaded up there. They get drunk in like the second or third inning and they're just ready to go. Like, remember 7, 8 years ago when Jose Bautista hit that home run and did the bat flip? That was the loudest on TV I've ever heard that place. The Blue Jays fans are really excited about their team. They've got a bunch of young studs. Like, we know about Vlad Jr., we know about Biggio, we know about Bichette, we know about those guys. But you look around the rest of that team, you've got Teoscar Hernandez, wizard. You've got Tapia there. He's a stud. On their pitching staff, you've got some players there. I think Kevin Gossman's sneaky one of the best pitchers in the American League. And so that team is loaded up for October. And I would not be surprised if you see them make it to the ALCS. I think Houston, you got to respect the experience. New York has had experience in the playoffs. I think Toronto and Seattle are certainly the newcomers. We'll see what happens with Cleveland, with Tampa, with some of these other teams. But for me, I'm bullish on the Mariners and Blue Jays and bullish on the Braves and the Cardinals. And then, of course, you have to respect the Mets, even though it looks like they're going to end up being a wild card team. The Padres, I know their magic number was getting there. We know the Dodgers have the experience. So this MLB postseason has the potential for a lot of young teams with a lot of big fireworks. And I think if you're just a tried and true blue blooded baseball fan, that's something that you should be looking forward to. All right. I also hope you're looking forward to the afternoon football we have ahead. If you're listening to us after the football slate, hope you enjoyed it. Hope your week is off to a good start on Monday or Tuesday, um, or later in the week, honestly, at this point. I don't know when you listen to the show, or if you're listening on audio or watching here after the live stream on YouTube. But we appreciate you having some time with us and checking us out here on our channel and on the Sportland USA Podcast Network. Please like, share, and subscribe to both this uh, video feed, this YouTube channel that we've got here, and also on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at HomeFieldPod. We look forward to having you check us out over there. But until next time, we'll be back next week with another episode of Home Field Advantage. We hope you have a great rest of your week.